Mi hijo dejó de ayudar con los gastos, pero sigue comiendo mi comida y viviendo en mi casa. My son stopped helping me with the expenses since the beginning of the year, but he didn't stop eating my food or living in my house. When I asked him where his wife was getting the money to buy designer clothes and expensive jewelry, he yelled, "That's none of your business." That was the response I got after 72 years of a devoted life, of silent sacrifices, of unconditional love. I am Bethany Carver, and for decades, I believed my greatest virtue was my generosity. Today, I know my biggest mistake was confusing love with submission. My house was always a sanctuary, a place where the doors were open, where food was never lacking, where affection was served in every dish prepared with my own hands. I worked my entire life as a seamstress, with swollen fingers and a back bent over other people's fabrics, to build this home. Every piece of furniture, every curtain, every corner of these walls was paid for with my effort. And I did it with pride, because I thought I was building a family. Chad was born when I was 25 years old. He was my only child, my reason for existing for so long. I raised him alone after his father abandoned us when he was barely 3 years old. There were nights when I went to bed without dinner so he could have a full plate. There were winters when I wore the same worn-out coat so he could have new shoes. But I never complained. Every sacrifice seemed small compared to the joy of watching him grow up healthy and happy. Chad was a sweet child. I remember how he would hug me when he came home from school, how he would tell me his dreams while I sewed late into the night. He told me that when he grew up, he would buy me a huge house, that he would take me to see the ocean, that he would never let me want for anything. And I believed him. The years passed between laughter and tears, between small victories and everyday defeats. Chad grew into a man. He got a modest job at a delivery company in New York City. I was proud of him. And then he met Megan. At first, she seemed like a nice girl. She smiled a lot, called me Mrs. Carver with respect, and brought desserts when she came to visit. Chad was in love, that was obvious, but there was something about her gaze that didn't quite convince me. Something cold, calculating, hidden behind that perfect smile. They got married in a simple ceremony. I paid half the expenses because they hadn't saved much money. And when Chad asked me if they could stay and live with me while they saved up for their own place, I didn't think twice. He was my son. How could I deny him a roof over his head? The first few months were good. Chad kept working, Megan found a job at a clothing store, and both contributed to the household expenses. It wasn't much, barely $300 a month between the two of them, but it was enough to cover part of the utilities and the groceries. I kept sewing, even though my hands no longer had the same strength as before. I remember the dinners in those early days. Chad would tell anecdotes from his work, Megan would laugh, and I would serve more pot roast onto their plates. There was a warmth that made me feel that the family I had dreamed of for so long was finally complete. But happiness, when built on weak foundations, never lasts long. It was in January of this year when Chad came to talk to me. He was serious, uncomfortable. He said they had some unexpected expenses and that they wouldn't be able to help with the household bills for a few months. "It will only be temporary, Mom," he said with a forced smile. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, because he was my son, and because I thought they were genuinely going through a rough patch. January passed, February passed, March passed, and the money never came. But the food they consumed continued to come out of my pocket. The hot water they used in long showers continued to be paid for by me. And I kept cooking for 3, doing laundry for 3, cleaning for 3. What hurt the most wasn't the money itself. It was the lack of consideration. It was coming home tired after sewing for 8 hours and finding the kitchen dirty, the dishes piled up, clothes tossed on the sofa. It was watching Chad spend hours watching television while I scrubbed the floor. There were days when I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands trembling with exhaustion, and wondered how I had gotten to this point. But every time I thought about talking to Chad, something inside me stopped. Fear. The fear of seeming selfish. My routine had become mechanical. I got up at Luke 6 Geo sang, prepared coffee, and made breakfast. Then I went to my small sewing workshop. I spent 8, sometimes 10 hours a day there, doing alterations, making dresses. Every stitch was an effort, but I couldn't stop. When I returned home in the evenings, I always found the same scene. Chad sprawled on the couch with his phone, Megan in the bedroom watching shows. No one asked how my day had been. No one offered to help with dinner. And I cooked. I set the table. I called them. And we ate in silence. Or worse, we ate while they stared at their phones, oblivious to my presence. But what really started to bother me was something that began happening in April. Megan started coming home with bags from expensive stores, bags from brands I barely knew by name, stores where a simple dress cost more than I earned in an entire week. The first time I saw her with a new bag, I didn't say anything. But then there were more bags, more clothes, more shoes, more purses. And they weren't cheap things. They were designer items. One day I saw her trying on a dress in front of the mirror. "What a pretty dress," I said to her. "Right?" she replied without looking at me. "It cost me $500. $500. $500 for a dress, while I was still waiting for the $300 monthly that they had owed me for months." Then the jewelry started. One day, Megan appeared with gold earrings with small diamonds. Another day, it was a thick silver bracelet. Then a necklace that, I heard, had cost $800. Every new purchase was another rock in my stomach. But I still didn't say anything. I kept waiting. I kept giving them the benefit of the doubt. Until one evening, while I was preparing dinner, I couldn't take it anymore. Chad and Megan were in the living room, talking about going to a fancy restaurant. "And where are you going to get the money for that?" I asked from the kitchen. An awkward silence fell. Then I heard Chad's footsteps approaching. He appeared in the kitchen doorway with a frown. "What are you implying, Mom?" he asked defensively. "I'm not implying anything," I replied. "I'm just asking. You told me you didn't have money to help with the bills, but I see Megan constantly buying expensive clothes and jewelry. So I'm wondering, Chad, where is that money coming from?" His face hardened. For a moment I thought he was going to give me a reasonable explanation. But what came out of his mouth was worse than any lie. "That's none of your business," he yelled. "What we do with our money is not your concern." I froze. Our money? The money they didn't have to contribute to the basic expenses of the house where they lived. "Chad, No, Mom, enough. You're being invasive. We are adults, and we don't have to give you explanations." Megan appeared behind him, arms crossed, and that cold smile. She didn't say anything, but her expression said it all. She was enjoying this. And with that, he turned around and went back to the living room with Megan. I heard them laugh a few minutes later, as if nothing had happened. I didn't eat dinner that night. I stayed seated in the kitchen, staring at the food I had prepared, feeling the tears roll down my cheeks. For the first time in my life, I felt I had lost my son. And in that moment, I knew that something inside me had changed. I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. I decided it was time to open my eyes and find out what was really going on. Because lies always end up coming to light. And when the truth finally appeared, I would be ready to do what I should have done from the beginning, defend myself. The days that followed that confrontation in the kitchen were strange, as if something invisible had broken between us. Chad and Megan avoided me. They left early and returned late. When we did cross paths in the house, we barely made eye contact. Silence had settled in like another tenant, heavy and annoying. But that silence also gave me something I hadn't had in a long time: space to think, space to observe, space to start putting together the pieces of a puzzle that had been in front of my eyes for months, but which I had refused to see. I started paying attention to the details, to the little things I used to ignore because I was too busy working, cooking, cleaning. Now, every time I entered the living room or passed by their bedroom, my eyes caught new things. The shopping bags were no longer just for clothes. There were shoe boxes piled up in her closet, Italian brand purses hanging on special hooks, French perfumes lined up on Megan's vanity. Each bottle cost more than $200. I know because I once saw one in a magazine. And it wasn't just her. Chad had also started to change his appearance. He wore brand-name shirts he had never been able to afford before, new watches that gleamed on his wrist, genuine leather shoes that left shiny marks on my floor. How? How could they afford all that if they supposedly didn't have money to contribute $300 monthly? One afternoon, while they were out, I went into their bedroom. I'm not proud of doing it, but I needed answers. I needed to understand what was happening in my own house. The room was immaculate, which was ironic considering the rest of the house was always a mess after they passed through. I opened the closet carefully. The amount of new clothes was astonishing. Dresses with the tags still on, suits Chad had never worn, sneakers that cost more than $300 a pair. But what really caught my eye was a shoebox on the top shelf. It was half hidden behind other boxes, as if someone didn't want it to be seen. I carefully took it down, my hands trembling slightly. Inside there were no shoes. There were papers, receipts, bills. I sat on the edge of their bed and started to look through them. Every paper I read was another punch to my stomach. Receipts from expensive restaurants. $150 for one dinner, $200 for another. Spa and beauty salon bills in Megan's name, facials, manicures, pedicures. Each visit cost over $100. But there was something else, something that made my heart stop for a moment. Bank statements. I didn't recognize them at first because the name on the header was mine. Bethany Carver. With trembling hands, I opened the first paper. It was a credit card statement, a card I had taken out years ago for emergencies and rarely used. The balance took my breath away. $8,500. $8,500 in debt. I reviewed the transactions with narrowed eyes, trying to understand. Purchases at department stores, jewelry stores, restaurants, electronics stores. None of those purchases had been made by me. I picked up the next paper. Another statement. Another card I had forgotten I had. $6,200 in debt. And another one. $4,800. In total, according to the papers in front of me, there was almost $20,000 in debt on cards that were in my name, but that I hadn't used. I just sat there, in that room that smelled of expensive perfumes and lies, trying to process what I had just discovered. I felt nauseous. I felt rage. I felt a sadness so profound that it was hard to breathe. My own son, my only son, the child I had raised with so much love and sacrifice, he was stealing from me. There was no other word for it. It was theft. They had taken my cards, my information, my identity, and had spent thousands of dollars without my knowledge, without my permission. And all this time they had told me they didn't have money to help with $300 monthly. The tears started to fall, uncontrollable. I cried in silence, clutching those papers to my chest, feeling every illusion I had about my family crumble. I heard the front door open. I quickly put the papers back in the box and placed it back in its spot. I left the room, trying to wipe away the tears, to compose myself before they saw me. Chad and Megan walked into the house, laughing about something. They stopped when they saw me standing in the hallway. "What are you doing there, Mom?" Chad asked suspiciously. "Nothing," I lied. "I was just checking if you needed me to wash anything." Megan looked at me with those cold eyes that disturbed me so much. She knew I didn't believe her, but she didn't say anything. She just went to her room and closed the door. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, mentally going over every detail of what I had discovered. $20,000. $20,000 that I would have to pay. $20,000 that they had spent on luxuries while I worked until my hands hurt to keep the house afloat. How had they gotten my cards? How had they gotten my information? And then I remembered. A few months ago, Megan had asked me for help with some online shopping. She said her card wasn't working and asked to borrow mine. I gave it to her without a second thought. After all, she was my daughter-in-law. I trusted her. How foolish I was. Surely at that moment she took pictures of my cards. She memorized the numbers. And since then they had been using them freely, racking up debt in my name, destroying the credit I had taken years to build. The following days were a torture. Every time I saw them, I had to bite my tongue to keep from screaming, from confronting them right there. But something stopped me. A little voice in my head that told me I needed more information, that I needed to understand the full magnitude of what they were doing before acting. So I kept observing. I kept silent. but now with a different purpose. I was no longer the submissive Bethany who accepted everything without question. I was a woman who was gathering evidence, preparing for the moment when I would finally put a stop to all this. I started checking my other documents, my bank statements, my savings, and what I discovered was even worse than I had imagined. I had a savings account that I had been feeding for years. Small amounts, $20 here, $50 there, but that over time had accumulated to almost $12,000. Those savings were my safety net, my peace of mind for any medical emergency or unexpected event. The current balance of that account was $1,200. Almost $11,000 had disappeared in the last 6 months. I reviewed every transaction. Cash withdrawals, transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, everything done electronically with my username and password. How had they gotten that information? And then I remembered. Chad had come to ask for my help with my computer a few months ago. He said he needed to update it, that it was slow. He was with it for almost 2 hours. Surely in that time he installed some program to steal my passwords, or simply wrote them down when I asked him to log into my email to print a document. My own son had planned this. He had systematically sought ways to access my money, my credit, everything I had worked so hard to achieve. The rage I felt was indescribable. But more than rage, I felt a profound sadness. Because it wasn't just the money, it was the betrayal. It was realizing that the person I had trusted the most in this world, the person for whom I had sacrificed everything, saw me only as a source of resources to exploit. One afternoon, while I was preparing food, Megan came into the kitchen. She was wearing new earrings that sparkled with every movement of her head. She poured herself a glass of juice from my refrigerator and leaned against the counter, watching me with that calculating look. "Mrs. Carver," she said in a sugary voice that made my skin crawl. "You know what? Chad and I were thinking of having a small celebration." "A celebration?" I asked without looking at her, focused on chopping vegetables. "Yes, it's because our wedding anniversary is coming up soon. 3 years already. And we wanted to do something special, a renewal of vows, something intimate but elegant." I kept chopping vegetables, waiting for her to continue. "We were thinking of having it at a nice ballroom, nothing too big, maybe 50 guests, with dinner, music, nice decorations, something memorable." "Sounds expensive," I commented, keeping my tone neutral. "Well, yes, but Chad and I have been saving," she lied shamelessly. "And besides, we thought that as a family we could all contribute a little, to make it special." There it was, the real reason for that conversation. They wanted me to contribute financially to their party. After stealing thousands of dollars from me, after not giving a single dollar for household expenses for months, they had the audacity to ask me for money for a celebration. "I see," was all I said. "So could we count on you? We're not asking for much, maybe about $2,000 to help with the hall and the food." $2,000. They wanted $2,000 more. My stomach churned. "I'll think about it," I finally replied. Megan frowned, clearly not the answer she expected, but she didn't insist. She left the kitchen with her glass of juice, leaving a trail of expensive perfume in the air. That night, when I was alone in my room, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront them yet. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me explode, of seeing me vulnerable. Instead, I was going to do something I should have done from the beginning. I was going to protect myself. I was going to take control of my finances. And when the right time came, when I had all the cards in my hand, then I would act. The next day, I went to the bank. I explained to the manager that I needed to change all my passwords, block my old cards, and get new ones with different numbers. I told him I suspected someone had accessed my accounts without authorization. The manager, a kind gentleman about 50 years old, looked at me with concern. "Do you want to file a police report, Mrs. Carver?" I thought about it for a moment, but I shook my head. "Not yet," I replied. "I just want to secure my accounts for now." We made all the necessary changes, new passwords that only I would know, new cards, alerts configured for any unusual transaction. I felt a little more in control when I left that bank, but I knew this was just the beginning, because what I had discovered so far was probably just the tip of the iceberg, and I had a feeling that the worst was yet to come. After securing my bank accounts, I returned home with a strange feeling. On one hand, I was relieved to have taken action. On the other, I knew that at any moment Chad or Megan would try to use my cards again and discover that they no longer worked. And then the questions would come. The excuses, maybe the accusations. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, Chad walked into my room without knocking. I was folding clean clothes when he burst in, his face red and my credit card in his hand. "Mom, what did you do?" he asked in an accusatory tone. "Good morning, Chad. What are you talking about?" I replied calmly, though my heart was racing. "This card is blocked. I tried to use it and it doesn't work. You canceled it." I looked him directly in the eyes. "And why would you have my card, Chad? Why would you be trying to use it?" He was silent for a moment, searching for an answer. Finally, he said, "I had it saved from when you lent it to me months ago. I thought I could still use it for an emergency." "What kind of emergency?" I asked, keeping my voice firm. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you blocked it without telling me." "Chad, it's my card. My money. I don't have to notify you when I make changes to my accounts." His jaw clenched. I could see the frustration growing on his face. "You're acting very weird lately, Mom. Very distrustful. I don't understand what's wrong with you." "What's wrong with me?" I repeated, feeling the rage I had been holding back for weeks begin to boil inside me. "You want to know what's wrong with me, Chad?" Megan appeared in my doorway, as if she had been listening behind the wall. "What's going on?" she asked with feigned concern. Chad pointed at me. "My mom blocked all her cards. For no reason." "I have my reasons," I said firmly. Megan looked at me with those cold eyes. "Mrs. Carver, I understand it's your money, but we live under the same roof. We are family. We should trust each other." Trust. That word sounded like a mockery coming from her mouth. Trust is earned, Megan, and it's lost when someone abuses it. "What are you implying?" Chad asked, taking a step toward me. "You're accusing us of something." I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to take out all the bank statements I had found and throw them in their faces. I wanted to tell them I knew exactly what they had been doing, but something stopped me. An inner voice telling me it wasn't the right time yet, that if I showed all my cards now, they would find a way to manipulate the situation, to make me look like the bad guy. So I took a deep breath and said, "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just being more careful with my finances. At my age, I have to think about my future." "Your future?" Megan said with a bitter smile. "We are your future. We are your family. Or have you forgotten that?" "I haven't forgotten anything," I replied. "Precisely why I'm doing this." Chad shook his head in frustration. "I don't understand you, Mom. You used to be so generous, so open with us. Now you're acting like we're strangers, like you can't trust us." Every word he said was like calculated manipulation, trying to make me feel guilty, trying to make me believe I was the problem. "Chad, you haven't contributed to the expenses of this house for months," I said in a calm but firm voice. "You eat my food, you use my utilities, you live under my roof. And meanwhile, I see Megan buying designer clothes and expensive jewelry, that you wear new watches and expensive shoes. So forgive me if I start asking questions." "We already told you that's none of your business," Chad shouted. "What we do with our money has nothing to do with you." "You're right," I said, surprising both of them with my answer. "What you do with your money is none of my business. But what happens in my house, with my resources, with my bank accounts, that is completely my business." Megan crossed her arms. "No one is touching your accounts, Mrs. Carver. I don't know where you get those ideas." I stared at her. The shamelessness on her face was incredible. She could lie so easily, without a single trace of guilt or shame. "I want things to be clear," I said, looking at both of them. "This is my house. I pay the bills. I put the food on the table. And from now on, my finances are private. I don't need to explain what I do with my money." "But we are your family," Chad insisted, now with a softer, more manipulative tone. "Families help each other. They communicate. They don't hide things." "Exactly, Chad. Families help each other," I repeated his words. "So maybe it's time for you to start helping too, because so far, all the help has come from one side." Megan snorted. "I see. This is about the money we stopped giving you. Are you bothered that we're not contributing right now?" "I'm not bothered that you're not contributing," I said, though it was a lie. I'm bothered by the hypocrisy. I'm bothered that you say you don't have money while spending thousands of dollars on luxuries. Enough, Chad shouted. I'm sick of your accusations. I'm sick of you treating us like criminals. If it bothers you so much that we live here, why don't you just say it directly? The silence that followed was heavy, tense. The three of us looked at each other without saying anything. I could feel something definitively breaking between us, something that might never be repaired. I don't want you to leave, I finally said, although part of me was no longer sure of that. I just want respect. I just want you to acknowledge everything I do for you. Megan let out a dry laugh. Acknowledgement. It's always the same with mothers. They do something for their children and then spend the rest of their lives reminding them, making them feel guilty. Her words hit me like a slap. Chad didn't defend her. He didn't defend me either. He just stood there looking at the floor, trapped between his wife and his mother. I think this conversation is over, I said, feeling the tears threaten to come out. Please, leave my room. Megan turned and left without saying anything else. Chad stayed for a moment, as if he wanted to say something. But finally, he also left, closing the door harder than necessary. I sat on my bed trembling, not from fear, but from contained rage, from frustration, from profound sadness. They had manipulated me. They had tried to make me feel guilty for protecting what was mine, for setting boundaries, for demanding a minimum of respect. And the worst thing was that Chad, my own son, had remained silent while his wife insulted me. He hadn't come to my defense. He hadn't acknowledged that she was being cruel and unfair. He had simply abandoned me. That night I heard their voices through the walls. They were talking in low but agitated tones. I couldn't distinguish the exact words, but the tone was clear. They were upset. They were planning something. And I was planning too, because I had learned that in this life, no one protects you better than yourself. And if my own family saw me as a resource to exploit instead of a person to love and respect, then it was time for me to make difficult decisions that would change everything. The days that followed that confrontation were the tensest I had ever lived in my own house. Chad and Megan barely spoke to me. When we coincided in the kitchen or living room, the air felt heavy, loaded with resentment. They acted as if I were the villain in this story, as if I had done something unforgivable by protecting my own finances. But I was no longer letting myself be manipulated. Every time I felt guilt trying to creep in, I remembered the bank statements, the $20,000 of debt, the $11,000 stolen from my savings, and the guilt disappeared, replaced by a cold determination. One afternoon, while cleaning the living room, I found an envelope lying next to the sofa. It was open and had the logo of an elegant downtown New York City hotel. Out of curiosity, I took out the paper inside. It was a quote. "Dear Mr. Chad and Mrs. Megan Carver," the header read. The letter detailed the costs for a vow renewal celebration. Ballroom for 50 people, $2,500. Dinner with premium menu, $3,000. Floral decoration, $1,200. Live music, $800. Guest lodging, 15 rooms for one night, $4,500. The total quote was $12,000. $12,000 for a party, while they owed me months of contribution to basic household expenses. But what really caught my attention was a handwritten note at the bottom of the document. Initial deposit required, 50% of the total, deadline. May 15th. I checked today's date. It was May 12th. In 3 days, the deadline for the $6,000 deposit was due. Where did they think they would get that money? And then I understood. That's why Megan had come to ask me for the $2,000. They probably thought they would take the rest from my accounts, as they had been doing for months. But now that I had blocked everything, they were desperate. I took a picture of the quote with my cell phone and put the paper back in the envelope, leaving it exactly where I had found it. More evidence, more proof of their audacity and deceit. That evening, Chad knocked on my bedroom door. When I opened it, he had an expression I hadn't seen on his face since he was a child. He looked sad, vulnerable. "Mom, can we talk?" he asked softly. I nodded and let him in. He sat on the edge of my bed, hands clasped, looking at the floor. "I'm sorry about how things have been lately," he began. "I know we've had disagreements. I know I've let you down by not being able to help with the bills." I stood with my arms crossed, waiting for him to continue. It's been tough months, Mom. Things aren't going well at work. There were staff cutbacks, and my salary was reduced. And Megan also had problems at her job. They've been paying us less than we expected. That's why we haven't been able to contribute like before," he continued. "And believe me, we feel bad about it. We feel terrible that the whole burden falls on you." "Chad," I finally said, "if things are so difficult financially, how is it that Megan has new clothes every week? How is it that you have 3 different watches you didn't have 6 months ago?" He was silent, searching for an answer. Those are things we bought before, when we still had savings. Before. I saw Megan arrive with new bags last week, Chad. I saw the tags. Those are recent purchases." "They were gifts," he said quickly, "from her family, from her friends. You know how women are, always sharing clothes." The lies came out of his mouth so easily they made me sick. This wasn't the son I had raised. Or maybe it was, and I had simply refused to see it. "And what did you really come for, Chad?" I asked, tired of the runaround. He took a deep breath. "I wanted to ask you something. I know things are tense between us, but Megan and I want to renew our vows. It's been 3 years of marriage, and we want to celebrate it. We want it to be special." Megan had already mentioned it to me. "Yes, well," he rubbed his hands nervously. "The event costs a little more than we thought, and we wanted to know if you could help us with about $6,000. I know it's a lot, but we would pay you back, in installments, as soon as our situation improves." $6,000, the exact deposit they needed for the hotel. "Chad, I don't have $6,000 to give you," I said, which was technically true. After all they had stolen, my savings were almost empty. His expression changed. The mask of vulnerability fell, and I saw a flash of frustration. "Mom, I know you have money saved. You've always been very careful with your finances." "I don't have as much as you think," I replied, watching his reaction. "Then why did you block the cards?" he asked, revealing more than he intended. "If it's not because you have money to protect?" There it was, the confirmation that they knew exactly what they had been doing. They knew they had been using my cards, and they were upset that I had put a stop to it. "I blocked them because they're mine, Chad. I don't need another reason." He stood up, the frustration now evident on his face. "I don't understand what's wrong with you, Mom. You used to be so generous, always willing to help, and now you're acting like money is more important than your own family." "Money is not more important than family," I said firmly, "but family shouldn't take advantage of me either. Family should be reciprocal, give and take, not just take." "We're not taking anything," he said, raising his voice. "We're living here because you offered us to. We eat here because you insist on cooking for everyone. No one is forcing you to do anything." His words left me breathless. The audacity, the total lack of gratitude or recognition. "You're right," I said after a moment. "No one is forcing you to be here, and I'm not obligated to keep sustaining your lifestyle." "What is that supposed to mean?" he asked defensively. "It means that maybe it's time for you to look for your own place. If my generosity seems so trivial to you, if living here is so insignificant, then maybe you should find somewhere else to live." The expression on his face was genuine shock, as if he had never considered that possibility, as if he had assumed he could always count on my house, my food, my money, without giving anything in return. "You're kicking us out?" he asked incredulously. "I'm suggesting that maybe it's time for you to be more independent. You're almost 30 years old, Chad. You're married adults. You can't live with me forever." "I can't believe what I'm hearing," he said, shaking his head. "Is this how you treat your only son? Throwing him out onto the street?" "I'm not throwing you out onto the street. I'm telling you that perhaps you need your own space, your own life, without depending on me." Megan appeared at the door. She had clearly been listening. "What's going on here?" "My mother is kicking us out," Chad said, his voice laden with drama. "I'm not kicking you out," I repeated, tired of the manipulation. "I'm just suggesting you find your independence." Megan looked at me with eyes full of venom. "This is unbelievable. After everything Chad has done for you, after us staying here to keep you company so you wouldn't be alone, and this is how you repay us." The laugh that came out of my mouth was bitter. "Keep me company? You think you're doing me a favor by living here for free, eating my food, using my utilities, spending my money without my permission?" "There she goes again with her accusations," Megan said. "No one has spent your money, Mrs. Carver. Stop inventing things." I looked at both of them, at my son, who avoided my gaze, at his wife, who looked at me with thinly veiled contempt, and in that moment, I understood that this situation could only end one way. But it wasn't time yet. I still needed a little more information. "Fine," I finally said. "Forget what I said. You don't have to leave, but don't count on me to finance your party either." Chad opened his mouth to protest, but Megan took his arm. "Let's go, Chad. Your mother has made her position clear." They left my room, and I heard them arguing in low voices as they walked down the hall. I closed the door and leaned against it, breathing deeply. I knew something was going to happen soon. They needed that money for their celebration, and I had just closed the door on them. The question was, what would they do now? The answer came faster than I expected, and it was worse than I could have ever imagined. 2 days passed in an icy silence. Chad and Megan barely spoke to me. They left early and came back late, avoiding me completely. I continued with my usual routine, working in my sewing workshop, preparing food that they ate without thanks, cleaning a house that only I kept in order. But something had changed in me. I no longer felt sad. I felt a cold clarity, a determination I hadn't felt in years. Every day that passed, I became more convinced that I had been living a lie, that the family I thought I had was only an illusion built on my own denial. It was May 14th when everything completely fell apart. That day, I had to leave early to deliver a Sweet 16 dress I had been making for weeks. The client lived on the other side of the city, so I knew I would be out most of the day. I left Chad a note telling him there was food in the refrigerator and that I would be back in the afternoon. But traffic was better than expected. I delivered the dress, got paid, and returned home around Luke 2 Geo-Chu, almost 3 hours earlier than planned. When I opened the door, I heard voices coming from my bedroom, my own bedroom. My heart pounding, I walked silently down the hallway. My bedroom door was ajar, and what I saw chilled my blood. Chad was sitting in front of my small desk, with my laptop open. Megan was beside him, looking over his shoulder at the screen. Papers were scattered on the table. My bank statements, personal documents, checkbooks. "She has to have more money somewhere," Megan was saying with frustration. "An old woman like her can't have spent everything." "I already checked every account I could find," Chad replied, typing quickly. "She only has about $2,000 left across them all. It's like she moved the money somewhere else." "Then find it," Megan demanded. "We need that deposit by tomorrow or we lose the ballroom. We already sent out the invitations. We already told everyone. We can't cancel now." "I'm trying," Chad said irritably, "but she changed all her passwords. I can't access anything new." "Then we'll have to do it another way," Megan said after a moment. Her voice had a calculating tone that made my skin crawl. "Where does she keep her jewelry? That gold chain she always wears must be worth something." Chad was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I don't know if—" "You don't know if what?" Megan interrupted him. "Chad, we've spent thousands of dollars preparing this celebration. We told everyone it was going to be the event of the year. Do you want us to look like failures? Do you want my whole family to laugh at us?" "It's my grandmother's chain," Chad said weakly. "Mom really cherishes it." "Your mom is 72 years old. What does she need expensive jewelry for? She doesn't go anywhere. Besides, we can pawn it and get it back later when we have money." The silence that followed was long, and then I heard my son say, "Fine. Look in her jewelry box. It must be in the closet." Something broke inside me at that moment. Seeing my son, the child I had raised with so much love, planning to steal his own grandmother's jewelry, the same jewelry my mother had left me before she died, the only things of sentimental value I had left from her. I walked into the room without announcing myself. "What are you doing?" I asked in a trembling but firm voice. Both of them jumped. Chad quickly closed the computer, as if that would erase what I had just witnessed. Megan straightened up, crossing her arms with a defiant attitude. "Mom, It's not what it looks like," Chad began, standing up. "It's not what it looks like?" I repeated, feeling the rage surge in my chest. "Because what it looks like is that you are going through my personal things without my permission, that you are trying to access my bank accounts, that you are planning to steal my jewelry." "We weren't going to steal them," Megan said dismissively. "We were just going to pawn them temporarily." "Pawning my jewelry," I said slowly, "without my permission. That's called stealing, Megan." "It's called survival," she replied coldly. "If you don't want to help us, we have to find another way to get the money we need." "The money you need for a party," I said, incredulous, "for a ridiculous celebration you can't afford, while living in my house without paying a dime for expenses." Chad approached me with his hands outstretched, as if trying to calm me down. "Mom, please, understand, we're desperate. We already committed to the deposit money. If we don't pay it tomorrow, we lose everything we've already invested." "And does that justify you entering my room like thieves?" I asked, stepping away from him. "Does it justify you going through my private documents, planning to steal your grandmother's jewelry?" "No one is stealing anything," Megan shouted. "God, you're so dramatic. We were just looking for options." "Options," I repeated bitterly. "And how many other options have you explored without my knowledge? How many times have you entered my room when I'm not here? How many times have you gone through my things?" "None," she replied. The guilt on Chad's face said it all. "You know what?" I said, feeling a strange calm come over me. "Sit down, both of you, because we are going to have a conversation we should have had a long time ago." Megan snorted. "I don't have to listen to any—" "Sit down!" I yelled, surprising even myself with the force of my voice. They both slowly sat on the edge of my bed. I stood in front of them, arms crossed. "I know what you've been doing," I began. "I know you've been using my credit cards without my permission. I know you accumulated almost $20,000 of debt in my name. I know you stole $11,000 from my savings account." Chad's face turned pale. Megan maintained her defiant expression, but I saw a flicker of concern in her eyes. "I found the statements," I continued. "I saw every transaction, every purchase at luxury stores, every dinner at expensive restaurants, every piece of jewelry, every bag, all paid for with my money, with my credit, without my permission." "Mom, I can explain," Chad started. "No," I interrupted him. "I don't want any more explanations. I don't want any more lies. I want you to tell me the truth. Right now. Why? Why did you do this to me?" Silence filled the room. Chad looked at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. It was Megan who finally spoke. "Because we could," she said coldly. "Because you never checked anything. Because it was easy. And because, frankly, after everything Chad has had to endure being your son, he deserved something better." Her words hit me like stones. What had Chad had to endure? Endure being loved? Endure being cared for? Endure his mother sacrificing everything for him her whole life? "Endure the constant guilt," Megan replied. "Endure you reminding him every day of everything you did for him. Endure being treated like a perpetual child who owes his mother everything." "That's not true," I said, looking at Chad. "Chad, tell me that's not what you think." Chad looked up slowly, and what I saw in his eyes crushed me. There was resentment. There was coldness. Nothing was left of the sweet child I remembered. "Sometimes I did feel that way, Mom," he said in a low voice. "Sometimes I felt like I could never be good enough for you, that I would always have this invisible debt I could never pay." Tears started to roll down my cheeks. "I never wanted you to feel that way. I just wanted you to know how much I loved you, how much I was willing to do for you." "Well, you ruined it," Megan said cruelly. "You raised him to feel guilty all the time, to feel like he owed you his life, so when he finally had the chance to take something for himself, for us, he took it, and I don't regret anything." I stared at her, this woman who had entered my house with fake smiles and sweet words, this woman who had poisoned the relationship with my son, who had turned my love into something twisted and ugly. "I want you to leave," I finally said. My voice sounded calm, but every word came from the depths of my pain. "I want you to pack your things and leave my house." "Now?" Chad asked, surprised. "Now," confirmed. "Not tomorrow, not next week, right now. I don't want you to spend one more night under my roof." Megan stood up with a mocking smile. "Perfect. We were sick of living in this miserable place anyway. Come on, Chad." Chad stood up slowly. For a moment, I thought he was going to say something, that he was going to apologize, that he was going to show even a flicker of remorse. But he didn't. He simply followed his wife toward the door. "Chad," I called out when he was in the doorway. He stopped, but didn't turn around. "Your grandmother's jewelry, the chain, the earrings, the ring. They are in a safe deposit box at the bank. I never kept them here at home, so don't bother looking for them." I watched his shoulders tense up. Then he left my room without saying a word. I heard them moving around the house, dragging suitcases, opening and closing drawers. Every sound was like a hammer hitting my heart. In less than an hour, I heard the front door close. I sat on my bed, amid the mess they had left, papers scattered, my computer open, private documents exposed. And I cried. I cried for the son I had lost, for the family I never really had, for all the years wasted on an illusion. But among the tears, I also felt something else, something I didn't expect. Relief. A huge weight had lifted from my shoulders. I no longer had to pretend. I no longer had to endure abuse disguised as family love. I was alone. But for the first time in a long time, I was at peace. Or so I thought, because I didn't know that the worst was still to come. The first few days after Chad and Megan left were strange. The house was silent, but it wasn't the tense silence of the previous weeks. It was a different silence. Empty, yes, but also clean, as if stale air had finally been pushed out. I dedicated myself to cleaning my room. I organized all the papers they had left scattered. I changed the sheets. I opened the windows to let in fresh air. It was as if I was erasing their presence, reclaiming my space. But at night, when I lay in bed, the loneliness hit me hard. It wasn't that I missed the arguments or the mistreatment. I missed the illusion. I missed believing I had a family. I missed the Chad who existed only in my imagination, the son I thought I had raised. 3 days passed, then 4. I didn't receive a single call, no message, no apology. It was as if Chad had closed that door and would never look back. But I knew something was about to happen, because May 15th had been the deadline for their deposit, and they hadn't gotten the money. What would they have done? Would they have canceled the celebration? Would they have admitted to their guests that they couldn't afford it? The answer came on the 6th day. I was in my workshop working on a pant alteration when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I usually didn't answer those calls, but something made me respond. "Mrs. Bethany Carver?" a professional female voice asked. "Yes, this is she. This is Caroline Miller from the Miraval Hotel. I'm calling to confirm the deposit payment for the event on May 25th in the name of Chad Carver and Megan Herrera." My heart stopped. "Pardon?" "Yes, we have a record that you are the one who will be making the deposit payment. We were sent an email from your address confirming you would cover the celebration costs." "I never sent that email," I said, feeling the anger start to boil again. There was an uncomfortable pause. "I understand. So you will not be making the payment." "I will absolutely not be making any payment," I replied firmly. "Well, then I'll have to inform you that the event will be canceled. The deadline for the deposit has passed. And I also have to mention that a cancellation fee of $500 will apply according to our policies." "I didn't hire anything," I said. "I didn't sign any contract. I didn't make any reservation." "But your name appears on the contract as the financial guarantor," the woman insisted. "Didn't you sign the document we sent via email?" "No," I said clearly, "and I suggest you check that signature because it's probably fraudulent." Another silence. "I see. Well, this complicates things. I'll have to speak with my supervisor and possibly with our legal department." "Do what you have to do," I replied. "But I will not pay anything. And if someone forged my signature, I want it investigated." I hung up the phone, my hands trembling. Had they forged my signature? Had they used my name to contract services they couldn't pay for? How far were they willing to go? I immediately called the hotel back and asked them to send me a copy of the contract. When it arrived in my email 20 minutes later, what I saw froze me. It was my name, my address, my phone number, and there was a digital signature that was supposedly mine. It didn't look anything like my real signature, but it was there. They had created a fraudulent document and had legally committed me to paying $6,000 plus additional services. But that wasn't all. Reviewing the full contract, I discovered something else. They had reserved 15 rooms for their guests. 15 rooms at $250 each, $3,750 extra, all supposedly paid for by me. The total cost of the event they had planned was almost $15,000, and I was the one who was supposedly going to pay for it all. I sat in front of my computer, breathing deeply, trying to calm down. I needed to think clearly. I needed to act strategically. First, I printed everything: the fraudulent contract, the emails, every piece of evidence of what they had tried to do. Then I called my bank and informed them about the situation. They assured me that no charge would be processed without my explicit authorization. Next, I called a lawyer, an older gentleman I had met years ago when I did my will. I explained the situation, and he told me that what Chad and Megan had done constituted fraud, forgery of signature, identity theft. I could press charges if I wanted to. "Do you want to proceed with a lawsuit?" the lawyer asked. I thought about it for a long moment. He was my son. Despite everything, he was still my son. Did I really want to get him into legal trouble? "Not yet," I replied. "I want to talk to him first. Give him a chance to fix this." But deep down, I knew that conversation wasn't going to be easy. And I was right. That afternoon, Chad finally called me. His voice sounded tense, irritated. "Mom, why did you call the hotel saying you weren't going to pay?" "Because I'm not going to pay," I replied calmly. "Chad, you forged my signature. You committed me to a debt of $15,000 without my permission. That's illegal." "We didn't forge anything," he lied shamelessly. "You told us you would help with the celebration." "I never said that," I replied. "And I have proof that that signature isn't mine." "You're ruining everything," he shouted. "We already sent the invitations. We already told everyone. Megan is desperate. Her family thinks we're failures." "That's not my problem. Chad, you created this situation. You lied to your guests. You planned a celebration you couldn't afford." "Because you denied us the money," he accused. "If you had helped us like a normal mother, none of this would have happened." "A normal mother doesn't let her adult children steal from her and abuse her," I replied firmly. "A normal mother sets boundaries, and that's exactly what I'm doing." "You know what? Forget it," he said bitterly. "We'll find a way to fix it. We always do." "How are you going to fix it, Chad? By stealing from someone else? By forging more signatures?" "You'll see," he said, in a strange, almost threatening tone. "You'll see how we fix it." And he hung up. I stared at the phone with a bad feeling. That tone in his voice, that veiled threat. What were they planning? 2 days later, on May 18th, I received a call from the hotel again. It was the same woman as before. "Mrs. Carver, I'm calling to inform you that we received a payment for the event deposit." "What?" I asked, confused. "I didn't make any payment?" "No, the payment was made by Chad Carver. He paid the $6,000 deposit." "Really?" I couldn't believe it. "Where did he get that money?" "I don't have that information, ma'am. I'm just informing you that the event is confirmed. And I also wanted to ask you about the payment for the rooms. When do you plan to make that payment?" "I am not going to pay for the rooms," I said firmly. "That is not my event. I didn't hire anything. If Chad made the deposit, then he is responsible for the rest." "I understand. Then I will update the contract to reflect that Chad Carver is the financial guarantor for the entire event." "Please do that," I said with relief, "and remove my name from any document related to this." When I hung up, I couldn't help but wonder where Chad had gotten $6,000. He hadn't gotten a loan because his credit was ruined after all he had spent. He hadn't sold anything valuable because he didn't own anything. So, how? The answer came 3 days later when I received a call from my sister Evelyn, whom I hadn't seen in months. "Bethany, is it true that you're sick?" she asked in a worried voice. "Sick? No, I'm perfectly fine. Why are you asking?" "Because Chad called me a week ago. He told me you had been diagnosed with cancer, that you needed expensive treatments, and that they were raising money to help you. He asked me to contribute what I could." The world stopped around me. "And you gave him money?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. "Yes," Evelyn said. "I gave him $2,000, and he also called your cousin Chelsea, your friend Melinda, and several other acquaintances. As far as I know, he raised a lot of money." I closed my eyes, feeling a mix of horror and rage. My own son had used my supposed illness to scam my family and friends. He had lied about my health, had exploited the affection they had for me, all to get money for his damn party. "Evelyn," I said in a trembling voice, "I'm not sick. Chad lied. He lied to everyone to get money from them." The silence on the other end of the line was long and heavy. "I can't believe it," she finally whispered. "Why would he do something like that?" "Because he needed money for a celebration," I explained, "and because apparently there's no limit to how low he can sink." After hanging up with Evelyn, I sat in my living room staring blankly. There were no more tears left. There was no more pain. There was only a cold determination. Chad had crossed a line I never thought he would cross, and now it was time for him to face the consequences of all his actions. It was time for me to stop being the victim and become someone who defended herself. Because if I had learned anything in the last few weeks, it was that silence and passivity only invited more abuse, and I wasn't going to be silent anymore. I wasn't going to be passive. It was time to act. That same afternoon, I called every person Chad had contacted. One by one, I explained the truth. That I wasn't sick. That Chad had lied. That he had used my name to scam money. The reactions were varied. My sister Evelyn was furious. My cousin Chelsea cried with indignation. My friend Melinda told me she had suspected something but didn't want to doubt Chad. Between them all, they had given almost $7,000. $7,000 stolen using my health as an excuse. My supposed cancer as a weapon of manipulation. "Are you going to do something about it?" Evelyn asked. "Yes," I replied with a calmness that surprised even myself. "I'm going to do something. But first I needed a plan." I didn't want to simply confront them. I didn't just want to scream and cry. I wanted them to understand, to feel even a fraction of the pain they had caused me. And then it occurred to me. An idea that at first seemed too daring, maybe cruel. But the more I thought about it, the more perfect it seemed. If Chad and Megan wanted their big celebration, they would have it, but not in the way they expected. I called the hotel back. I asked to speak with Caroline, the event coordinator. "I want to make the payments for the rooms," I told her. There was a pause of surprise. "Seriously? I thought you weren't—" "I changed my mind," I interrupted. "I want everything to be perfect. It's my son's celebration, after all." I gave her the information for my credit card, the new one Chad didn't know about. I paid for the 15 rooms, $3,750. I asked her to send me the receipts and all the reservation information to my email. "Anything else you need, Mrs. Carver?" Caroline asked. "Yes," I replied. "I want the confirmation numbers for all the reservations, and I want to know what the cancellation policy is." "Well, you can cancel up to 48 hours before the event with a full refund. After that, only 50% is refunded." "Perfect," I said. "Thank you very much." I hung up with a strange feeling in my chest. It wasn't exactly satisfaction. It was something more complex. I was taking control. I was stopping being the passive victim. The following days were spent in a strange calm. I continued with my normal routine. I worked in my workshop, cooked only for myself, cleaned my house, which now felt bigger and emptier. But my mind was always calculating, planning. Chad didn't call me during those days. I suppose he was too busy preparing his grand celebration, organizing details, showing off to his friends about the party of the year. On May 23rd, 2 days before the event, I received a text message from Chad. It was the first since our last call. "Mom, I know things are difficult between us, but this event is important to Megan and me. If you want to come, you'll be welcome." I read the message several times. There was no apology. There was no recognition of everything they had done. Just a casual invitation, as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't stolen from me, lied to me, and betrayed me. I didn't reply. On May 24th, one day before the celebration, I sat in front of my computer. I opened my email and looked for all the hotel reservation confirmation numbers. 15 rooms, 15 families that would arrive after the party expecting a place to sleep. My finger hovered over the mouse. This was real. This was going to happen. Did I really want to do it? I want to. I thought about the $20,000 of debt they left me. I thought about the $11,000 stolen from my savings. I thought about the lies about my supposed illness. I thought about how they had forged my signature. I thought about how Chad had allowed his wife to insult me in my own house. I thought about all the pain, all the betrayal, all the disrespect. And then I clicked. One by one, I canceled the 15 reservations. The system asked me if I was sure. I clicked confirm each time. I requested the full refund. $3,750 that would return to my account. When I finished, I stared at the screen with the cancellation confirmations. It was done. There was no turning back. I slept better that night than I had in months. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel remorse. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. Control over my own life. The morning of May 25th dawned sunny and warm. It was a perfect day for a celebration. I imagined Chad and Megan waking up excited, getting ready for their big event. I imagined their guests dressing in their best clothes, buying gifts, preparing for a special night. I didn't feel sorry. I felt nothing but a cold calm. I spent the day at home, working in my workshop as usual. I ate a simple lunch. I watered my plants. I watched a little television, a completely normal afternoon, except that I knew what was coming next. I imagined the party, the music, the dinner, the toasts, Chad and Megan renewing their vows, surrounded by friends and family, everyone celebrating, laughing, taking pictures. And then I imagined what would happen afterward. The guests arriving at the hotel, tired after the celebration, eager to rest, approaching the reception with their confirmation numbers, and discovering that there was no reservation in their name. The confusion, the questions, the desperate calls, and finally, the horrible realization that someone had canceled everything, that there were no rooms for anyone. 15 families with nowhere to sleep. 15 groups of people asking Chad what had happened, why he had promised lodging that didn't exist, and Chad searching for answers, calling the hotel, discovering that the reservations had been canceled by the person who paid for them, by me. I didn't know exactly what time it would all happen, but I knew it would happen. And when it did, Chad would finally understand that his actions had consequences, that he couldn't keep abusing people without facing any repercussions. As the sun set that afternoon, I sat in my armchair with a cup of tea. My phone was next to me. I knew that at some point in the night it would ring. I knew Chad would call, furious, desperate, looking for explanations. And when he called, I would be ready to give him the only explanation he needed to hear. That the time had come for him to take responsibility for his own decisions, and that I, finally, had stopped letting him hurt me. The phone vibrated around Luke 11 Geodame. It was Chad. I took a deep breath and let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Finally, I answered. "Mom." Chad's voice sounded desperate, almost unrecognizable. "What did you do?" "Hello, Chad," I replied calmly, taking a sip of my tea. "How was your celebration?" "Don't play dumb," he shouted. "You canceled the hotel reservations. All our guests are here with nowhere to stay. They're calling us furious. How could you do this to us?" "How could I?" I repeated slowly. "Chad, I paid for those rooms with my money. They were my reservations. I had every right to cancel them." "But you knew we needed them. You knew all of Megan's family was coming from out of town. Now they're scrambling for hotels at midnight and everything is booked. You made us look like idiots." "No," I said firmly. "I didn't make you look bad. You made yourselves look bad. You promised something you couldn't afford. You lied to your guests. "You promised you would pay us," he lied shamelessly. "I never promised anything, Chad. In fact, I clearly told you I wasn't going to finance your party. But you went ahead anyway. You forged my signature. You stole money from my family by lying about an illness I don't have. And now you blame me." I heard voices in the background, Megan yelling something I couldn't understand. Then her voice got closer to the phone. "You bitter old woman," Megan shouted. "You did this out of pure malice, because you can't stand to see us happy, because you're an envious person who doesn't want her son to have a better life than yours." "Megan," I said, with a calmness that surprised even me, "I paid for those rooms. $3,750 out of my own pocket, money you never asked me for. You simply assumed I would cover it. Just as you assumed you could use my credit cards. Just as you assumed you could steal my savings." "We didn't steal anything," she screamed. "I have the statements," I continued. "I have all the transactions. $20,000 in debt you accumulated in my name. $11,000 that disappeared from my savings account. And I have witnesses to how Chad scammed my family by saying I had cancer." The silence that followed was long. Then I heard Chad's voice again, now more controlled, but just as furious. "And this is your revenge? Ruining our special night? Humiliating us in front of everyone?" "It's not revenge, Chad," I replied. "It's justice. It's the natural consequence of your actions. You stole from me, you lied to me, you disrespected me in my own house, and I stayed silent for a long time, but not anymore." "You're a bad mother," he said with venom in his voice. "A real mother would never do this to her son." His words hurt, I won't lie, but they didn't crush me like before, because I had finally understood something important. Chad was no longer the boy I had raised. Or maybe he never was. Maybe I had simply refused to see who he really was. "A real mother," I said slowly, "teaches her children that actions have consequences. A real mother sets boundaries. A real mother doesn't allow herself to be abused in the name of love. And that's exactly what I'm doing now." "You're going to regret this," Megan threatened from the background. "No," I said with certainty. "I'm not going to regret it. The only thing I regret is taking so long to defend myself." "Don't call us again," Chad said. "Don't look for us again. As far as we're concerned, you no longer have a son." And he hung up. I sat in my armchair staring at the phone in my hand. "You no longer have a son." Those words should have crushed me. They should have made me cry, beg them to come back, apologize for everything. But they didn't. Because the truth was that for a long time I hadn't had a son. Not in the way that mattered. I had someone who shared my blood, yes. But I didn't have someone who loved me, respected me, valued me. The days that followed were silent. But it wasn't the painful silence of before. It was a healing silence. The house felt lighter, the air cleaner. My sister Evelyn came to visit me. She hugged me for a long time without saying anything. Then we sat together and had coffee. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. "Sad," I admitted, but also relieved, free, like a huge weight has been lifted from my shoulders. "You did the right thing," Evelyn said, squeezing my hand. "I know it hurts. I know it's difficult. But no one deserves to be treated the way they treated you, not even by your own son." I cried that afternoon, but they were different tears. They weren't tears of despair or helplessness. They were tears of liberation, of acceptance, of closing a painful chapter. In the following days, I dedicated myself to reorganizing my life. I talked to the bank about the debts Chad had left. I talked to my lawyer about the next steps. I talked to an accountant about how to recover financially. It wouldn't be easy. I had $20,000 of debt to pay. I had lost most of my savings, but for the first time in a long time, I felt I had control over my future. Evelyn suggested I go to therapy. "Not so you can forgive Chad," she clarified, "but so you can forgive yourself, so you can let go of the guilt I know you're carrying." She was right. Part of me still felt guilty. I had been too harsh. I had overreacted. I had ruined the relationship with my son forever. But then I remembered everything that had happened, and I understood that I hadn't ruined anything. They had. I had only stopped allowing it. One afternoon, while sewing by the window, I saw a young mother pass by with her small son. The child looked at her with adoration. He showed her a flower he had found. She crouched down to receive it, smiling. And I understood something. The love between parents and children is beautiful when it's reciprocal, when there is mutual respect, when both value and care for each other. But when it becomes a one-way street, when one only gives and the other only takes, that is no longer love. It's abuse disguised as family obligation. I had given everything for Chad, and he had taken everything without thanks, without value, without respect. And when I finally set a boundary, when I finally said enough, he punished me with his absence. But his absence was better than his toxic presence. His silence was better than his constant demands. His contempt was more honest than his fake affection. I was freeing myself, slowly, painfully, but I was finally freeing myself from the illusion that had kept me trapped for so long. And although the road ahead was uncertain, although the loneliness sometimes weighed on me, I knew I was walking toward something better, toward peace, toward dignity, toward a life where I mattered, where my needs were valid, where my pain was recognized. I was learning to live for myself, and that, I discovered, was a gift I never thought I would allow myself to receive. Months passed. Summer turned into fall, and with it came a transformation I never imagined possible. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was gentle, gradual, like the change of seasons. I started filling my days with things I had forgotten I enjoyed. I signed up for a painting class at the community center. My hands, so accustomed to sewing, were now learning to mix colors and create shapes on a canvas. I wasn't good, but that didn't matter. I enjoyed the process. I also started going out more. Evelyn invited me to lunch every week. I reconnected with friends I had neglected for years, too busy being a mother, being a provider, being everything for someone who never appreciated it. My house, once full of tension and resentment, became my sanctuary. I bought new plants for the garden. I painted the walls colors I liked. I rearranged the furniture the way I wanted, not the way others found convenient. Financially, it was tough. I had to work overtime in my sewing workshop. I took on more orders. I worked weekends. Little by little, I paid off the debts Chad had left. Every payment was a small victory. Every dollar recovered was one more step toward my freedom. I never heard from Chad again. He didn't call to apologize. He didn't send messages. It was as if he had disappeared from my life completely. And although at first that hurt me, over time I understood that his absence was the best gift he could have given me, because I could finally heal. I could finally see clearly everything I had been denying for years. The manipulation, the abuse, the systematic exploitation of my love and my kindness. One day, while having coffee in my garden, my cousin Chelsea came to visit me. She brought news. "Bethany," she said carefully, "I saw Chad the other day at the grocery store." My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my face serene. "And how was he?" "He looked tired. He was buying cheap things, generic brands. Megan wasn't with him." She paused. "He said hello to me, but he looked embarrassed, like he wanted to say something but didn't know what." I didn't say anything. I just nodded. "Do you think he'll ever come back?" Chelsea asked. "Apologize?" "I don't know," I replied honestly. "And I don't know if I care anymore. I've learned that I can't force anyone to value me. I can't force anyone to treat me with respect. The only thing I can do is respect myself." Chelsea smiled sadly. "You look different, lighter, like you've taken off a heavy coat." She was right. I felt lighter, because I had stopped carrying guilt that wasn't mine. I had stopped being responsible for someone else's decisions and actions, even if that person was my son. I started going to therapy, as Evelyn had suggested. At first, it was difficult to talk about everything, but my therapist, a wise woman named Elvira, helped me understand patterns I had repeated all my life. "True love doesn't exhaust you," she told me one day. "True love doesn't leave you empty. When a relationship takes more from you than it gives, when you feel smaller instead of more complete, that's not love. It's something else." Her words resonated deeply within me. My whole life I had believed that loving meant sacrificing until you disappeared, that being a good mother meant giving without limits, without conditions, regardless of the personal cost. But now I understood that was a lie. That true love included healthy boundaries, that saying no didn't make me selfish, that protecting myself didn't make me a bad person. I made the last debt payments in December right before Christmas. When I saw the zero balance, when I confirmed that my credit was clean again, I cried. But they were tears of joy, of accomplishment, of freedom. I spent that Christmas with Evelyn and her family. Their house was full of laughter, warmth, and genuine love. And I realized that family is not always those who share your blood. Sometimes family is those who choose to stay, who value you, who respect you. On New Year's, as the bells rang and the fireworks lit up the sky, I made a promise to myself. Never again would I allow anyone to make me feel small. Never again would I confuse abuse with love. Never again would I apologize for defending my dignity. I'm 73 years old now. My hair is completely white. My hands are still sewing, though slower than before. My house is quieter than I ever imagined. But I am happy. In a deep and genuine way I hadn't experienced in decades, because I learned that chosen solitude is better than toxic company. That peace is more valuable than the illusion of a perfect family. Sometimes when I sit in my garden at sunset, I think about Chad. I wonder if he will ever understand what he did, if he will ever feel remorse, if he will ever learn that people are not resources to exploit, but human beings to value. But those questions no longer consume me. They no longer define my life, because I have learned that I cannot control the actions of others. I can only control mine. And I chose to live with dignity, with self-respect, with peace. My life is not perfect. There are still difficult days. There are still moments of loneliness. But they are nothing compared to the agony of living subjected to constant abuse. I recovered something I had lost a long time ago. Myself, my voice, my strength, my worth as a person beyond what I could give to others. And that, I discovered, was all I truly needed. The freedom to be who I am, without apologies, without guilt, without fear. The freedom to close the door to what hurts me and open windows to what nourishes me. The freedom to choose peace over chaos, dignity over manipulation, self-love over empty sacrifice. It took me 73 years to learn this lesson, but I finally learned it. And now, in this new stage of my life, I walk with my head held high, knowing that I deserve respect, I deserve genuine love, I deserve peace. And if that means walking alone, then I will walk alone. Because I discovered that the best company I can have is my own when I finally learned to value myself. This is my story, the story of how I lost my son but found myself. And although the price was high, I wouldn't trade this ending for anything in the world, because for the first time in my life, I am truly free.